Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Welcome, everybody, to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited today. We're talking about sexual addictions. I have here with me Rick and Christine Presley. Rick and Christine are licensed clinical marriage and family therapists. They're trained as experts in the field of sexual addiction. They're also working extensively with both addicts and partner betrayal trauma. That would be the partners and the trauma they experience from the addict. They are trained as EMDR professionals, which is a trauma memory protocol. They also have a back history of being on pastoral staff within churches, which is so cool for the Red Ink family. And then they have their own story of addiction, pain, and ultimately recovery. Their story has been featured on the James Robison TV program Life Today. They've been married for a bunch of years, and they have 2 adult children. And I will have to say they're 2 of my favorite people. They're my friends. So, guys, it's great to have you guys back on our newest episode.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Well, let's jump into it. We're talking sexual addiction. I want, before we get into the actual topic, to be able to hear a little bit about y'all's backstory and why you're passionate, because you've given your life in this whole season of your life, in the rest of your life, to really helping both people struggling in addiction and the partners who've suffered because of the addiction that's in the spouse. So why are you guys so passionate about it, and why'd you choose to be in this discipline?
Well, as you referred to, we have our own backstory there, and starting when I was really young, around puberty time, 9, 10, 11, I started acting out sexually in various ways, and that continued. I don't want to go into a lot of detail for time purposes now, but that continued on through the first 6 years of our marriage. So all through high school, all through college, and then the first 6 years of our marriage, I was struggling with what I didn't know then. I just thought it was some kind of sin or bad behavior or something like that, but what it really was a sexual addiction. And so 6 years into our marriage, I confessed to Christine one night, and that started about another 6 years of ups and downs, good times, bad times. We were in ministry full-time before that. We were asked to leave full-time ministry after I confessed. Then we got back into ministry, and then we got out. And I mean, this all kinds of chaos and crazy that was, it was hard. There was a lot of years of very, very difficult times. And then in 2007, was finally able to connect with a therapist who was an expert in the field and really helped me. Before that, the attempts that we made at seeking out therapy were pretty ineffective because my story and what was going on for me, I really needed an expert. I really needed somebody who was trained in this area. And when you see a therapist or a pastor or a friend or whoever who isn't trained in this, you're probably not going to get the help you need. And which only increased my own shame.
Yeah. Because
here I am, I'm trying to go to a therapist, and they're looking at me like, I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
And so that just increased the narrative in my mind that I'm a problem. I'm not good enough. I'm broken beyond repair. So saw a therapist and got on the path to healing, and got into recovery groups and got some sobriety under my belt. And then because of all the changes in life, just made a decision to settle down in the Kansas City area here. And if that meant full-time ministry, fine, but if it didn't, we'd find a different path. And eventually decided to go back to school and get my marriage and family therapy license to be able to do the same thing. Because I wanted to help people in the way that I had been helped.
Yes.
I wanted to be another voice in the sea of therapy and help people that help people, who was an expert, who was trained, who knew what they were doing, who knew what they were talking about, to give these men and women, these men who are struggling, these couples who are struggling and in pain, wanted to give them help, give them hope.
Yeah.
And so that's what motivated that. And now 12 years later, this is what we do.
Which is amazing, because God flipped the script where your pain story becomes a promise for other people, a help. Well, Christine, when you think of the passion you have for partners, because you work really deep in the weeds with, and it's often ladies who are hurting, trying to make sense of themselves. Talk a little bit about how you navigated through that to the point that you today are so passionate to help, betrayed partners.
Yeah. Well, yes, there was severe pain and trauma from being a partner of an addict. A lot of the gaslighting and the manipulation and all the lies, and you feel crazy as a partner. You feel like you have no sense of foundation underneath you, and this person who is supposed to love you and be truthful to you and be safe for you is no longer that. And yet at the same time, you still want to believe that it's still possible that this is going to happen. And, as he said, he went to a couple therapists, and they weren't quite helpful because they weren't trained in this. And for me, it was very damaging, actually, because they would look at me and say, so how have you contributed to his problem? And I'm like, wait, I had no idea that there was this problem. It was all hidden, it was all secretive, and I had no idea that there was this secret sexual lifestyle. And so that was very damaging, to be labeled codependent and you're a co-addict, or all of the labels that get thrown out there. Yeah. And so I just stopped. I just sucked it up and stopped doing anything, and I stuffed it. And it wasn't until 2 years after he had some sobriety. I mean, he's 2 years sober, a year into the program of getting his licensure for marriage and family therapy, and I decided to figure out what's going on inside of me, and it just came spewing out. And I for months was severely angry. Like, I've never experienced anything like that, and I didn't know what was happening. So I sought myself a therapist, and we worked on a lot of trauma work. And even in that, it wasn't an expert on betrayal trauma that I saw. I just saw a trauma therapist, which was really helpful for me. But a lot of the pieces of partner trauma work that I did, I found online with people who did specialize in this. Like, I remember there was a time we were asked to go and tell our story and like do a workshop, and I'm like, I don't know how I stayed. Like, the biggest question is, how did you work through this? I have no idea. I just did. I had babies, I had children, I had to just exist. And so because of all of that, and realizing there wasn't any help, and seeing that he was doing such, he was already on this path of getting this, I decided, okay, this is something that I'm really passionate about, because I didn't have anybody, and if I could invest in one life and help one person's life not feel so crazy as a partner, man, what a great impact that I could have, and help.
Yeah.
So.
And you totally get it when a betrayed partner is getting help from you.
Yes.
You totally relate with their story.
Yeah.
And I love the passion and the competence, the giftings that you have. You're so good at it.
Thank you.
And again, I'm just always amazed at how God's able to redeem a story. Something that was so painful, so filled with suffering for both of you, and what is behind the stories and what drove everything, to know that God would take that and give a vision of freedom and a vision of hope for other people, and the tools to get there, because it's not like God is in the dark about how to help people become healthy. But sometimes we live in a religious box where we can't think outside that box, we can't use tools outside that box, and then we stay in our victimization. And so I'm so proud of you guys. I love watching what God has done and what he continues to do. Let's hit your Christian faith story just for a minute. We don't, again, need to spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's important for people to hear your spiritual story. How did you come to faith? And of course, you guys end up meeting at a university, a Christian university, and then get married. But talk about your story of faith and how you came to faith, and kind of build the tension a little bit, in your case, Rick, of pursuing Christ, really caring about your faith. At the same time, you've got this other part of you that is just flying off the handle.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. I grew up in a pretty conservative, I'd say a religiously rigid and legalistic environment. And it was what I knew. I went to a school that was not connected to that church, but another, pretty religiously rigid, legalistic school. So that was just kind of my world. I left home and then high school and college, and was doing life and pursuing what I knew to pursue. I was just so immature spiritually, and definitely immature emotionally. So many reasons, and not to blame any one thing, but the religious environment that I did grow up in, I think, really stunted me in my spiritual growth and my emotional growth. Then on top of that, the addiction that I was dealing with from a pretty young age, we know through research and all that is a way that people get really stuck emotionally. And I'm just trying to figure it out, But I keep making moves that I think are the right move. So I found myself at a religious Christian university, and went through school and was at that time got a degree for church music. So I was a music guy, and we served at a couple of churches full time as music ministers. And again, there were so many things in my life getting in the way of me growing in my spiritual life and my understanding of God and my understanding of grace and all of that. And certainly was struggling with an experience of it. I mean, like the experience of grace was pretty far away because I had so much shame, and I needed to be something. I needed to act a certain way that I wasn't acting to be able to have God's grace on me, So when I got sober, when I first confessed to Christine, and then we just kind of this journey of moving here, moving there, and getting this job and that job. Even during that season, I don't know that there was much growth spiritually. That there was always a hunger, there was always a want to, there was always, this is the right path for me to be on. But I think my most tremendous growth was probably in grad school when I was because I was attending a university that was a Christian university, but they didn't lead with that very much like some other more conservative universities did. But I had a professor that profoundly impacted my life, definitely more than any other teacher had, and one of the most influential people in my life. And he just kept pushing me and kept encouraging me, and he kept recommending that I read a book. And I kept putting it off. I'm like, I don't need to read this book. Like, I've got so many other things to do in grad school. I don't need to read another book that I don't have to read for school. So it was a couple months after I graduated, I picked that book up, and the name of it at that time was called True Faced. And now it's been retitled to The Cure. But that just like opened up this whole, this mind explosion. Like, wait a minute.
Love it.
It was just a whole new language for me. And then probably my more significant growth has been since we've started attending here at Life Point. Wow. That book was so congruent with the way you teach. And I think my understanding of grace and my relationship and all that has grown a lot in the process of growing maturity or emotional maturity. It's been a growth process, and it continues to be a growth process. As it is.
Hey everybody, I want to slide right in and interrupt the conversation. I want to ask you to do us a huge, huge favor. If you can go to wherever you get your podcast and review it, give us a review and give us, bam, 5 stars. It would be such a help to promote our show in Apple and in other places. Also, if you could like it and share it, if you watch it on YouTube, if you will comment about the joy or the thrill or the insights that you're gaining from it, I want you to know that every comment becomes a catalyst for somebody else. Again, it would be a huge favor to us if you'd do that for us. But now let's go right back into the conversation.
I love it. I love, again, just thinking through how the Holy Spirit will lead you into wholeness, because that's God's heart for all of us, is to be whole. The life Jesus came to give us is His life, and that life more abundantly. Yeah. When I, again, hear the storyline and even how you had a mentor who gave you the book, and you are talking about how he didn't lead with the rigidity of the rule. I find it interesting that in Christianity, rigidity of a rule, the purpose of the rule is to be rigid, rather than, when we think of Christian ethics, that we should explore it. And sometimes the rigidity gets in the way of exploration, and we don't ask good questions. We don't explore who we are and what's going on the inside, and what's happened to the image of God that's in us, those kinds of things. So I love that you had somebody who was able to open the eyes and the heart to God's amazing, loving grace. And of course, I know your story in a lot of different vantage points, so I sit in it with feelings, and I love what God's done in you. Yeah. Christine, tell us a little bit about your story of faith, and how you ended up at a Christian university, and what you see your life being when you were pursuing Christ in a Christian context.
Well, I grew up in a Christian home as well. Went to church twice on Sunday, every Wednesday, every week. And knew that Jesus loved me. And I've always known that. That's been such a blessing throughout my whole life, is that even in the hardest times, I've always known that at the foundation, that there's a love there. I didn't always think that He liked me, though. And and that is part of my trauma story, like with my family. Feeling I was a middle child, and there's a lot that goes into my upbringing, but there's a piece that the way I felt in my family, I also related that to my relationship with Christ. Yeah. And so if I did better and I looked better, then He would like me, and as well. Yeah. And there was a difference for me between like and love. Yeah. And so I just did the next right thing after high school, and I went to a Christian college, and I was on the traveling teams, and that's where I met Rick. We met at a convention, and pursuing my faith in college was a little different. There was some traumatic experiences that I had there as well.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, what in the world is happening here? It was almost like it was a separate, there wasn't an embodiment of Christianity, if that makes sense. It was, you do this, it just didn't feel real, even though it was probably very real back then, but hindsight now, I look back and it's was it really real? And of course it was, but it just feels different even than now. So stepping into a pastor's wife position, I thought, oh, this is great. This is close to God.
Yeah, right.
I know that sounds so crazy, but
no, that's real.
It just feels like that. It's oh, this is spiritual, and this will be helpful, intentional.
It's purposeful.
Purposeful, but it's also I have to go to church. I wanted to. It's so weird to even say that out loud, but I have to go to church because I'm a worship pastor's wife. I loved to be a worshiper and to sing and to be a part of that, and yet it helped make it consistent. Yeah. And then everything happened, and I continued pursuing my relationship with Jesus as best as I could in the church that we were at, and yet it just felt like, people say that Jesus with skin on is the best healing, and I just was so isolated. And
Yes.
I just see, he doesn't like me. He really doesn't.
Yeah.
And it just was more confirmation for me. And it wasn't truthfully, I think there's been a whole journey of finding and pursuing Christ. But I think when we came to Life Point, there was such a huge shift and really owning and maybe not owning, but learning of what does it mean that God, Jesus, likes me. He likes me no matter what I do. Yeah. He looks at me and he dances over me, and
come on,
there is just something that is exciting about that for me.
Yes.
So that switch, and I just appreciate the teachings that we have gotten here at Life Point and how that has just really allowed me just to be me.
Yes.
Whether I'm making great choices or not. I'm human and I do stupid things sometimes, and he still likes me, and he still calls me chosen and beautiful and all of that. So.
And understands when you make a poor choice what was behind it.
Yeah, right.
And he can be touched with the feeling of our infirmities from that vantage point.
Right.
And I just love that. I had a group of pastors and leaders that I was hosting in a coaching environment on Zoom earlier today. And there are several that they have a cognitive dissonance. They have an emotional state of, I just don't think God likes me. These are pastors and leaders that are sincere and going after God with all their heart. Yeah. And yet they struggle with the rebukes Jesus would give to the religious leaders. Yeah. And he would come down on them and they're like, well, I wonder if I'm that guy. Yeah. And of course it goes back to the backstory, similar to what you talked about with your family of origin and kind of how you evolved in the attachment with your primary caretakers, your mom, your dad, and so on. I love the fact that you've come through this story and Jesus being the center of your joy, and in terms of feeling like you are loved and searched and known by him, and not just known that's kind of pathetic, but known as in, I know you've got some fragility, but you're my chosen, you're loved, you're delighted in. Again, I think that's so critical because we know, which we'll get into in a minute, that addictive behavior and every maladaptive behavior, anything that's a disorder, every one of them comes from an anxiety disorder or an intimacy disorder. And John writes about it, and he says that perfect love is the only thing that can cast out fear. Yeah. And so your ability to transition into absorbing God's love, his that he likes me. Yeah. Because again, a lot of people are like, I know God loves me. It's almost like he's God, he's got to love me, but I'm the problem child that he doesn't really like.
Yep. Right.
So to know that he has a good mood to me, it's amazing. Well, let's talk about addiction. And again, today we're emphasizing sexual addiction, but begin with the baseline definition. What is addiction, and what's the difference, perhaps, in an addiction and maybe even compulsive behavior?
Okay. So addiction is a process that starts out with using a tool, using a resource, using a coping mechanism that is okay, that's soothing, that brings you some kind of relief. And over time, it becomes something out of control. It becomes something that you've made multiple attempts to try to stop without success. You oftentimes see people who struggle with addictions doing kind of this binge purge thing where I'll go and I'll do this behavior like intensely, get massively drunk or high or act out sexually in whatever way, and then they kind of swear off of it for a period of time, a few hours, few days, few months. That can look different in everybody's life. There's excessive time spent in engaging in that behavior or seeking out that behavior. So you'll see like the thoughts, the consumption of the person And a lot of times, you know, especially when it comes to sexual addiction, this is all kind of private stuff, like nobody else knows. With other addictions, it's a little more visible to friends and family. You're oftentimes failing in work or social obligations or school or something like that. So there's these impacts that this behavior is beginning to have on things outside of me, not just inside of me. So there's these signs that we start to look for that says, okay, this person is probably dealing with an addiction. And what the addiction is that it's this neural pathway that's gotten created in their brains that their brain always takes. So oftentimes when we're in, I'd say kind of a classical story is somewhere around 12, 13, 14 years old. So much of life is shifting. We're going through puberty, and we're disconnecting in a lot of ways from our old coping mechanisms. So we're growing, and our bodies are growing, maturity, and we're disconnecting from the baby blanket that we held. We're disconnecting from our thumb sucking. We're disconnecting from family. We're disconnecting from mom and dad as being that person who provided me soothing. And life may be chaotic, life may be hard, and so we start to look for new options. And because of our age and because of our maturity of our bodies and because of school and lots of other different things, there kind of this door begins to open up for everybody of new ideas, new things that can be soothing. So I go and I play basketball. I go and I hang out with my friends. I maybe go drink. I maybe smoke a little cigarettes or pot. I get exposed to porn and I start using that, or I masturbate, or, you know, all these different things that are beginning to become options for me to move from bad to good.
Yeah.
Our bodies naturally move from bad to good. So when you pull your back, you walk funny.
Yeah.
And it's your body moving, trying to move away from the pain, trying to move from bad to good. And over time, when we continue to choose one or more, you know, maybe a couple of those options, and we go back to it, and we go back to it, and we go back to it as the thing, it, like what I tell people is like we're in bad and we want to move to good, and it's this vehicle that I get in that moves from bad to good, and I always get in the same vehicle. Yeah. And the more I always get in that vehicle, the more likely it's going to become that it starts out as a compulsive behavior, and then it moves into an addiction, because our bodies, in a sense, hijack us and propel us with this energy, with these thoughts, with emotions that says this behavior is the thing that's going to move me from bad to good.
Yeah.
And I can't even see any other option. I can't even feel or imagine that anything else would give me that benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it starts to take on a life of its own. And this is when addiction really becomes a problem, where now I'm not even so much using that behavior. You are, like there's this sub-level thing that's happening where I'm using that behavior to move from bad to good, but there's this life that addiction behavior takes on its own, where now I need to maintain that.
Yeah.
Where, you know, kind of a real extreme example would be alcoholics that can't stop drinking because they will physically get sick, or drug addicts that will get sick. And now it's not so much about, like the felt sense is not that I'm having a bad day and I need to feel better, but I am going to die or I'm going to get sick if I don't do that behavior, if I don't engage in that addiction. Yeah. So that's kind of a brief overview of addiction.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry. We have a monthly, we do on Zoom. It's a 2-hour event every second Monday of the month throughout 2021. We also have 6-week modules that are called weeklies. So we have a monthly, and we also have an opportunity for weeklies. The weeklies, we help you rediscover the deeper parts of your story. First, I want to dig down into our monthlies. We gather with Dr. Todd Bowman, who's a psychologist, neurobiologist, is on many of our podcasts. And then we have usually a guest who is a tenured minister, a strategist. And we, for 2 hours, will have 20 to 30 plus different people who are gathered together. We collaborate and you set the topic. we come out of the gate with a particular thing on our hearts, and then you want to talk about tactics, strategies, what to do in a political season or in a pandemic season, or what needs to happen in your marriage or your parenting. Maybe there is a parishioner that is just triggering you like crazy, or it's so complex you're trying to figure it out. Well, we've gathered together the best hearts, the best minds to be able to pull that stuff apart and then help you put it together again. So that is our monthlies. Again, it's free, doesn't cost you a dime. It's our gift to you. Then we have our weeklies. Our weeklies are with 6 as a minimum, up to 10. We have males and females that are set apart, and we help you understand the emotional drivers that have been driving you and what has actually inked your sense of identity. It's a profound experience. Our graduates tell of how life-changing it has been for them. We walk through your history and we help you make sense of your present. We believe that God wants to expose roots that are actually behind our behaviors. It's an amazing discovery time to really rediscover you. We help you redeem life, and we help you re-dream ministry. We would love for you to be a part of it. Normally, I get $150 for coaching, $150 an hour. This whole program for 6 weeks in Mod 1 would be valued at around $900 of work. And yet, it is my gift to you. I would be honored to walk the journey and to go heart and heart and hand in hand with you. Both the monthlies and the weeklies are featured on Zoom, so wherever you are in the world, it actually is something you can do. Invite your pastor and ministry friends to jump on with you, and let's have a revival. All you have to do is go to reddinkrevival.com for either the monthly or the weekly. Red Ink, REDINK, revival.com. Be sure to register, and I can't wait to see you at both.
Well, it's interesting, and when you think of how the addictive process is, and then you think of the word freedom on the other side of it, freedom then would, in essence, just a quick simplistic one-liner, is the ability to manage the desire, the compulsion, and to direct towards things that are healthy and functional. And so it doesn't mean that you're free if you don't get tempted anymore. It means that in the midst of temptation and desire and even arousal, that you've reallocated the neural pathways to the degree that now you can manage it. And it is a neurobiological issue. It's not just a spiritual, mystical, invisible demon. There is an impact on the way the brain functions, and the brain likes to use as little energy as possible. So once it has a repeated behavior, it creates an instinctive kind of behavioral robot that you just go do. When we think about sexual addiction, what all is included in sex addiction? Of course, you know, you've got things like porn and so on, but what all's involved in sexual addiction?
Man, I mean, there's just so many faces and ways that people express themselves sexually that can be problematic, compulsive, repetitive, addictive. Man, anything that releases that feel-good hormone, that releases that the dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, it can be a relationship. It doesn't even have to be a sex act necessarily, because there is such a thing as love addiction, where the drive to have a relationship, and oftentimes you'll see people have lots of new relationships, because that's when that oxytocin is flowing, is in that first 6 months of a relationship, and then that kind of starts to die off, and then they start to see problems, and then they drop them, and then they go to somebody else. So it doesn't have to be a sexual behavior, but yes, porn, masturbation, any kind of sex outside of a committed marital relationship, or it goes beyond a person's morals, values, and ethics. Just you name it, anything that you could come up with, and it's surprising what people do come up with sometimes as ways to act out sexually, can all be part of their template and their arousal template and their sexual expression.
Yeah. When we talk about sex addiction specific, what's the difference in somebody who has a sex addiction and somebody who has got a real high sex drive?
Well, it goes back to that criteria of the unmanageability. Yeah. The loss of jobs or school opportunities, loss of social engagements, the financial stuff, the loss of control around acting in a way that is congruent with their spiritual beliefs, morals, and ethics. Yeah. The constant, I can't get my mind off of this. It's all consuming. It takes up my more mental space than not. I mean, somebody who's got a high sex drive should be able to turn that off and focus on work or engage with family or do something different and not be just overwhelmed by thoughts and feelings and desires and this drive to act this out somehow. Whereas sexual addiction, it becomes just this really hyper aroused place where it's just I'm on or wanting to be on all the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think it's also about integration of all of life. Like, if you have a high sex drive, you're talking to people. Like you're including people in, not because it's if you have a high sex drive, you're including people. Yeah. Like you're talking to your partner about that. You're not hiding that. You're talking about it. You're open. You're honest. You're integrous throughout all areas of your life. Yeah. And I think so when it's becomes a problematic behavior, then you become hidden. Yeah. You start hiding. You have a lot of shame that goes alongside of it, and you have no awareness of. Well, you might have awareness of the natural consequences that are coming down the road, but you do it anyway, irregardless if it's going to hurt my family or my partner or my job. I'm going to lose my job, like you said. You have no regard for the consequences of it. Yeah. And you also become isolated in it. You hide. Again, I said that a minute ago, but you hide in your addiction versus not hiding when you have a high sex drive.
Yeah. When we think of porn as an example, in today's hyper-sexualized culture, you have some from the old school, more traditionally trained people who will say that any kind of porn, any kind of sexualized arousal kind of imagery is sin. So bam, just the Christian ethic is thrown right on top of it. But even within Christian circles today, the Christian ethic is blurred, at least experientially, for young people. And it's like everybody does it. It's like, what's the big deal? And so on. And so in the lens of let's call it pornography addiction, what's the deal with pornography addiction versus just, somebody who's gone to see some porn? And because there will be many who will diminish that. And I'm just curious, from a professional perspective, how you guys size that up.
Oh man, porn is such a big topic. I mean, I would even disagree with you in the people that say that the Christian ethic is thrown on top of it. Like, I've heard so many stories of men who've been struggling in some way. They go see their pastor or whatever, and they're kind of like, the wife is hurting, she's in trauma. And the pastor will kind of say something to the fact that, well, that's just what men do.
Yeah, right. Boys will be boys.
And so yes, is there it's supposed to be bad narrative that's out there? Yeah, but is that actually how it plays out? Not very often.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
And it's complex. Well, it's confusing. It's so confusing because they hear, many of us have heard through teaching or through preaching or through whatever that don't watch porn, that's bad, that's sinful, but then like everybody is.
Right.
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 So is it really that bad?
Right.
And on some level, there's like this question even in my mind of like, what if we could go back to the good old days where porn was just magazines?
Right.
Like is it healthy? Was it unhealthy? It was better than what we got now.
Right.
I mean, the when it comes to porn and porn addiction, what our kids are dealing with today is so beyond anything that I would have ever been exposed to before I was 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first time I really got onto online pornography and saw what was there and what has happened since then, and the move towards such aggression and violence and just graphic stuff. I had a guy in my office today who, I don't know exactly how old he is, but I would guess he's in his mid-50s, who was talking about how he is kind of a breast guy, like he likes to see women's breasts. And he struggles big time with that, and he and his wife are trying to work that out and work towards health and safety and all that. But even him was just like, man, what's online today is it's just so vulgar.
Right.
And so it just has such an impact on our brain development and our understanding of ourself, our understanding of another, our understanding of sex and of intimacy, our understanding of relationships. I have a hard time finding anything good that comes from pornography.
Yeah.
Now, there are people that would definitely disagree with me.
Right.
And that's okay. Right. The problem with porn today, and I think all along it's been this problem. This is not a new thing. I think the problem is that it's so devoid of relationship.
Yeah.
Like when you watch porn, are you going to learn something? Are you going to learn a new sex act or a new position?
Right.
You might. That is a possibility. But the relational component, the difficulty of like actually making that happen in a relationship and in a coupleship, the uncomfortableness, or the joy, it's so devoid of anything when it comes to emotion, relationship, coupleship, companionship, working together, that I think that's one of the things that I see men struggling with so much is when they disconnect from porn and they can disconnect from compulsive masturbation and they try to really use that energy in their marriage, they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They don't know how to connect. They don't know how to love. They don't know how to be vulnerable and to risk and all of that, because porn is just about body parts touching each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't show how difficult it is to actually make those body parts touch in a meaningful, loving, compassionate, erotic way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an intimacy disorder.
Absolutely.
That drives it.
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
And it's interesting when you think of porn use, if you just get outside of the religious box and can go deeper and ask the question, why? What is the porn satisfying? What is it creating for you that you feel is necessary? Because what porn can be is a blockage for exploration of the true drivers inside of you. Because it's a short circuit. It's I'm under stress, or I am feeling alone, I'm not experiencing feeling searched or loved. And if I see a video image of something that looks like that I would feel known or seen or heard or felt, etc., then you don't have to deal with the deeper constructs. You don't have to deal with the roots of bitterness that have driven you for your whole life. So you're not growing, so you're not getting the intimacy you need, so you're stuck in a ridiculous cycle, and so the next thing you know, you end up just making a normative of porn use. And so I think it's a critical thing. Now, biblically, I think we do see various things that are in the Christian ethic that we have to face up to, we have to address, we have to look at. To say, what is it that God knows is going to hurt me, and what is it that God knows is going to create dysfunctions in all my relationships. And so, there's a lot here, as you said, around the porn use issue. And yet, for many, there will be, if somebody uses porn on the regular, they will deny that there's any addiction and no need to work on me. It's just not an addiction. It's just boys will be boys kind of deal. I do think that you're exactly right. We need to really deal, much more direct with it. I think about some of the past years, the recent years, where we hear of these alleged indiscretions or even worse, abuses of power by people like Harvey Weinstein or Matt Lauer, other high-profile people. And immediately some folks will embrace that, they're struggling with a sexual addiction. So it's kind of like it becomes a label that gives them a bit of a pass. And then others will be like, nah, it's no addiction. It's just somebody who's a dog, a pig, and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea is that it causes people to avoid the ownership of their cheating and their choices. Talk to us just a little bit about how to make sense of somebody who abuses power, exploitation, in these two cases I mentioned of Harvey and Matt Lauer. What's the difference in that and a true sexual addict? So either way, we can talk about it, but pick that up.
What is the difference? So, well, they certainly could be a sex addict.
They could be.
And there is one of the reasons why I think people who are struggling with this need to go to somebody who's trained in this is because this term of sexual addiction needs to be radically protected. It's far too used in various circles. It's overused. I think their spouses can be guilty of putting that label on their husband because they find out they've been using porn. They may be a sex addict, they may not.
I've even heard on that level of wives who have a husband who's got a high sex drive, but never acted outside the marriage, isn't accessing porn. She says he's a sex addict because he desires to have often.
And he might be.
Right.
Like could he be using her as his object to basically get off on, and there's very little relational component. She doesn't have a voice. She feels used. She feels taken advantage of. She feels pressured.
Yeah.
And he doesn't give her much option. And this is your role. This is your wifely duty.
Oh my gosh.
And he could be a sex addict, But there's criteria that we have to meet, and there's criteria that we have to look at that says, okay, is this what's happening, and is this, things. And so I just got to be careful using that term, but one who is acting out in the way, in those examples of Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein that you gave, I think for one, or for a therapist or somebody to be curious about whether or not they have a sexual addiction is probably a rational road to go down.
Yeah.
Like, let's tease this out. Let's find out what's really going on here. Now, the question I think you might be asking is, well, I think you did ask it, the difference between kind of power and control and sexual addiction. Well, I think another way to say that is like narcissism. Are they narcissistic, or are they sex addicts?
Yeah.
Or are they both?
Yeah.
And so there's got to be work done, and going to a trained professional that knows the difference in all of that and can help a person see that is a really, really critical thing.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how you brought up this concept, or this thing that happens where a family member, or sometimes even a spouse, will react to the one who's struggling with the behavior, will say, well, I think I might be, or I am a sex addict. I went to a therapist and they told me I'm a sex addict, or I've read this book and I think I might be that. And then the family member or a friend or spouse will respond in a way of like, well, that just sounds like you're giving yourself a pass.
Right.
I can promise you there's never been anyone in the history of ever who's wanted to be a sex addict. Like, it's not a fun label.
Right. Yeah, no, that's real.
It's not a fun label to take on. And I think it's interesting because I don't hear that same thing with people who've been struggling with alcohol and then find themselves in AA and then find themselves getting some help by adopting the term I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Like, for families, that's oftentimes like, maybe there's hope here.
Yeah.
But again, with the sex thing, there's like this, well, you don't have to take ownership of your behavior. And it's like, no, actually, I think being a sex addict and actually going to recovery groups and going to therapy and doing the work that one would do because they're a sex addict is going to be the ultimate in taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah.
Do they struggle taking that responsibility? Yes, for sure. Because one thing about the way the brain works, and one of the impacts of addiction is addiction creates the ultimate selfishness. I mean, the self-centeredness and selfishness that happens in addiction, and when one's acting out in their addiction, the selfishness shows up in doing everything they possibly can, including harming another person emotionally, but through denial, betrayal, all that kind of stuff. Everything I can to protect my ability to continue to act this way.
Yeah.
And protect the secret, protect the addiction.
Yeah.
When the behavior gets exposed and then the behavior starts to stop and cease and they get into sobriety, well, that selfishness and brain thing can continue to happen by their inability to grow emotionally and take ownership and be empathetic towards another. There's a lot of selfishness that happens early on in recovery that, just the whole 12-step recovery program is about breaking through some of that denial and exposing that selfishness and that those brain patterns and thought patterns.
And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of partners go down the road of, well, I've done all this research on narcissistic behaviors, and my husband has to be a narcissist. Well, not necessarily. It's because of the shame narrative that comes and rises up that they have to protect. They have to protect that, and you cannot protect that by not being exampling narcissistic behaviors. They're doing everything in their power to protect that, to protect themselves, protect this image that they have created most of their life. And so I hear it all the time, verbatim. Is my husband really a sex addict, or is he just an asshole? I hear that all the time because they don't want it to be. It feels like, well, if they are just a jerk, then and making terrible choices, that I can leave. But if they're sick, I said for better, for worse, for richer, for poor. And so it's this crazy making like, well, if it is an addiction, which I don't even know if I think that's even possible that it's an addiction. I mean,
right.
Then how do I know? How do I know?
And I imagine that sometimes when a spouse might say, that's just a pass, you're just getting a free pass. If we were to dig down, and you do this work all the time, but if you were to dig down and explore why they are projecting that, it's their own survival mechanisms as a partner that's traumatized, trying to figure out how to first make meaning, and secondly, how will I survive this whole deal?
Right. How do I exist in this?
Well, and I'm thinking that when partners feel from the husband, we're talking classical sense where the husband's an addict, wife is a partner, right? So a husband's acting out and he says, well, I'm just a sex addict, And so, yes, to a partner, that does sound like minimization. That does sound like an excuse. And so that may be why they're reacting to the term sexual addiction. It feels like a pass. Well, he's using it as a pass. That's why. But man, again, it goes back to that selfish, self-centered mindset of I'm going to use every tool in my toolbox to keep me in this acting out, to keep me being able to act out, and entitled to act out, and keep me from taking ownership of what I need to do.